Hi folks, we're just giving a few moments at the top here for Zoom to let everybody in before we get started with tonight's event. If you are already logged into tonight's event with us, you can open up your chat window and find some information about how to purchase books by tonight's featured authors. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Chelsea from Greenlight, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with Paul Mendez presenting his new book, Rainbow Milk. We'll be talking with Robert Jones Jr., so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Paul, Robert, and the team at Doubleday for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make this space for conversation and connection. Now, just a few housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they cannot see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. That's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and interact with your fellow attendees. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Rainbow Milk, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person in our bookstore locations, noon to 7 p.m. every day of the week, and you can purchase Paul's book and many others on site. Or order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll drop that buy link in the chat. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Our interviewer tonight is Robert Jones Jr. He is a writer from New York City. He received his BFA in creative writing and MFA in fiction from Brooklyn College. He's written for numerous publications, including the New York Times, Essence, and the Paris Review. He's the creator and curator of the social justice social media community Son of Baldwin, which has over 275,000 members across platforms. The Prophets is his debut novel. He'll be speaking with our featured author, Paul Mendez. He was born and raised in the Black Country. He now lives in London and is studying for an MA in Black British Writing at Goldsmiths, University of London. He has been a performing member of 2 theater companies and worked as a voice actor, appearing on audiobooks by Andrea Levy, Paul Throw, and Ben Okri, most recently recording Ian Wright's A Life in Football for Hachette Audio. As a writer, he has contributed to the Times Literary Supplement and the Brixton Review of Books. His new book, Rainbow Milk, is an essential and revelatory coming-of-age narrative from a thrilling new voice. As 19-year-old Jesse reckons with race, class, sexuality, and spirituality in his search for self-discovery, freedom, and the stability of a chosen family, Rainbow Milk tells the story of, in Mendez's words, the new Black body in the old white promised land, floundering, unloved, yet able to summon the strength to survive through a fierce reclamation of the past. Paul is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then he'll be talking with Robert and with all of you. Paul, please take it away.
Thank you, Chelsea. Good evening, Robert, and good evening, the community of Greenlight Bookstore, Brooklyn. With that introduction, I'm just going to preface this reading briefly by saying that the novel opens with a sort of prologue, if you like, written in a sort of Jamaican patois first person narrative by a gentleman called Norman, who's in his early 30s and is a working class Jamaican immigrant to the UK in the late 1950s, just going for a job interview. And I apologize, Brooklyn, for my unrehearsed Jamaican accent. Plenty door I get lead through behind the secretary woman, who always check behind her like she worried that her watching a little bottom in her high-waist skirt and heel, and everybody look up and watch me pass. Mr. Parker seemed nice from the minute I see him. Tall. Not as tall as me, but I think that why he respect me straight away. Gray hair, comb immaculate. Gray suit, blue tie. Thick dark eyebrow and moustache. And him get up from him great big desk with bright window behind, take off him spectacle and rush out to shake me hand. Never did I sit in a chair so comfortable in all my life. He smile on me and asks all these questions about Jamaica and tell me him always want to go. I compliment him on the floor arrangement behind him. Peony, Rose, Lily, Lysianthus, Alstroemeria, Amaryllis. And him tell me that hardly anybody who come to interview for gardening job know anything about flowers. I tell him I used to be a groundsman for a hotel in St. Anne's Bay, then for Mr. Henry Chambers of Weymouth House. Mr. Parker start to look at me all confidential. Him pace up and down with him hand in his pocket in front of his window and think out loud to himself. Then offer me the job. I don't say more than a few words, but him shake me hand and tell me, we'll see you Monday. Just like that. Him say that there is a job for life at the council if I did want it, that I can take exam and train to become horticulturalist. Him say I can be one of the new wave of colored professional in the UK. When I come home and tell Claudette, she scream like I get groundsman job for the Queen. It's easy to get a council house when I work for the council, and we move into one on a nice estate in West Bromwich close to Swan Village Gasworks. Doreen's sad to say goodbye to Claudette, but Claudette not sad to move in a much nicer neighborhood where there is more space between the house and where there is a common across the road. The house come with 3 bedrooms and a big garden front and back. We try not to look at the tall, big gray gas tank that fill up the sky from we back garden. Claudette can walk not too far to Great Bridge, a good market street with butcher, fishmonger, grocer, wallpaper shop, coffee house, cinema, post office, chemist, Woolworth, Tesco, anything she could want. December come, and Claudette gone into labor. Them rush her straight in the birthing room and out follow with firstborn, balling up in the air, the strongest, hardest chest that ever ear come from a baby. Robert James Alonzo is sitting on my foot, playing with his toy, still making plenty noise. He eat good and start walk early, talk early, and do everything early. He will make all we proud, make his Uncle Philip proud, make his grandfather Barrington proud, make his daddy Norman proud, make him own son proud.
Paul, thank you so much for that reading in your impeccable patois. Um,
Thanks,
and
Nathan.
I want to say thank you for even asking me to talk with you about this amazing, amazing novel. And it is kind of tough to believe that this is your first work. because it is written with such confidence and such burning honesty that I feel like this book is going to save some lives. That's truly how I feel about this work. And I'm so glad that you read from that section, because my first question is actually about why in particular you chose to begin during this time period, which is sort of the Windrush period, of which not many African Americans know, because these colonial powers are really good at not letting us know what our brethren around the world are facing, so that we don't understand how much we have in common when it comes to the ways in which we're oppressed by these systems. And so you begin here, and you wrote the book, that this section of the book, in patois. So I want to know, one, why begin here? And two, why in that beautiful patois?
First of all, thank you for all of those kind and wonderful words. And before we sort of came on live, I just wanted to tell the audience that I was gushing at Robert for absolutely everything that he's done for me personally, for Black people all over the world. You know, I don't know where I would be without the son of Baldwin and other similar African-American activists who just taught me that I had a history. You know, I didn't believe that I had a history. I didn't know anything. I mean, the Windrush generation was only called the Windrush generation, as far as I was concerned, when the scandal broke, when people were being deported and asked to sort of prove their settled status in the UK, despite living and working here in many cases for over 50 years. And it made me realize all four of my grandparents were members of this so-called Windrush generation, all of whom came from Jamaica. All of my grandparents came from Jamaica in the 1950s to live in the UK. And it was a source of shame for them. They, you know, wanted to forget about the trauma that they went through in leaving their families, leaving their home, moving to a foreign country that they'd never sort of been to. I mean, it's like us sort of upping and moving to, like, I don't know, Australia or something, or somewhere where we've never been before. It's like, okay, you make that move and then you stay there and you never look back. That was traumatic for them, you know, certainly sort of moving to a racist country where they weren't welcome. The government opened the door for them to come here, but didn't quite prepare the white working classes for who's going to be living amongst them, and allowed the white working classes to sort of keep the same ignorant sense of white superiority and Black inferiority that they'd been taught in school, you know, wrongly, of course. I didn't deliberately begin with Norman. I didn't write Rainbow Milk in a linear way. I was very inspired at times by the sort of multivocal styles of, say, A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James. And one of the ways in which I sort of thought in the sort of early experimental stages of novelizing my own story was to do so multivocally. And Norman's was one of the early voices that I hit upon. So the Windrush scandal broke in the news at the end of 2017, just as I was getting my book deal. And I sort of started to think about my paternal grandfather, who died when my dad was 2 years old. And there's very little sort of knowledge of him, like nobody talks about him. And all I knew of him was that he was fit and healthy when he came to England. But then almost as soon as he got here, started suffering from terrible migraine headaches and sight loss. In the end, he went blind. And my grandmother, who by then had 2 children with him, couldn't take care of them and work the 2 or 3 jobs that she needed to in order to pay the bills and be his carer. So she sent him back to Jamaica to live with family. For some reason, she didn't want to go back there herself. And that's all I knew of him. He died some time later. So thinking about that and thinking about the lost stories of our ancestors, and that's kind of what you've done with your novel as well. You know, it's about there's no us without them.
Right.
There's no us without our ancestry, without our ancestors. And because I hadn't been empowered to know anything about my ancestry, it just felt really sort of important to delve in. So I created the character of Norman, and in terms of the patois, you know, as anyone can hear, I'm very English sounding. You know, this is my like my family like laugh at me because I'm so sort of posh sounding as far as they're concerned. I sound like a white boy. So in a way, on one level, I just wanted to sort of show that I had mastery over Jamaican Creole, and that I could assume that character and that voice and be in dialogue with it myself. That I could have empathy with the ancestry, and but also for authenticity. You know, I couldn't write that in standard English. Um, I was very much inspired by Sam Selvon and again Marlon James, Andrea Levy, who wrote first person characters in Jamaican Creole, varying degrees of kind of strength, if you like. An earlier draft, it was much denser patois. And my UK publisher, who is Jamaican British like myself, was just like, you need to water that down a bit because nobody's going to be able to understand it. So there's kind of always a balance there between, I guess, communicating with people who share your heritage in a way that we're on a level, we're speaking that same language together. But also, you know, this book has got to be read by people outside of that community as well. So sort of, you know, making it accessible for them. But it was just really, really necessary to ground Jesse's story at the turn of the millennium in something that happened in the 1950s, because that is the origin of all of the subjects that he lives through.
I think that it was actually a brilliant choice to not only begin there, and I actually wanted more. I wanted more of that period, that family, Norman, Glory, all of them. I wanted more of that. And I also think it was a brilliant choice to do it in patois. And the reason why is because I'm of the Toni Morrison sense about English, that we as Black people, we have to do something to make it ours. Otherwise, we're just speaking the colonizer's words. So while Toni Morrison wrote in standard English, she arranged it in such a way that its rhythms, its music, even its meanings, its feelings were something rooted in Blackness. And I think that you achieve that. And I'm actually of the mind that you should have went full tilt. Like you should have went with all the heavy stuff, because we are expected to learn and understand the master narrative, as Toni Morrison put it, right? So shouldn't, you know, if we are centering ourselves in these stories, shouldn't then they try to move to that center as opposed to us trying to move to wherever they are? We're always expected to move.
It's very true, but like, and I agree with you, and I think I would like to do that with a future novel. I just perhaps didn't, you know, this is my first novel, and I didn't quite have the confidence to go all the way. But um, early on, when I didn't have any reviews yet, and I was kind of like checking Goodreads every day to see what people were saying, like whether my whether people like the book or not. One reviewer said, 2-star review, doesn't anyone write properly anymore? Like, you know, if you're going to use all these words and all this language, you need to have footnotes at least so that, you know, we can read it. And, you know, that was really early on. So I was just like, oh no, what have I done?
Oh.
But you know, I mean, that's just how racism coming out, and there's nothing I can do about that. But
Rule of
yeah,
thumb.
you know, a future book, I think, yeah, definitely I want to. I mean, there's so many levels here because, you know, being someone of a Jamaican British heritage, I've never been to Jamaica. My parents have never been to Jamaica either. You know, it's a broken line. Um, you know, we're poor people from the Black country. We didn't have enough to eat growing up. We couldn't save for tickets to go abroad, you know.
Right.
So, and you know, all well, three of my four grandparents have now passed on. The other is in assisted care. So it does feel as if, you know, I would be going there as a tourist rather than, you know, being handed over by the person who keeps that heritage alive, that sort of that line alive. Um, and it's sort of my own journey that I have to go on, and it's a similar journey that Andrea Levy went on, in terms of, you know, growing up thinking that she was white, basically, and not in touch with her heritage at all, writing a couple of novels about being a Black British person, but then going to Jamaica and then her whole world opening up. And I think that's probably what I'm going to end up doing as well.
That is a great segue into my next question. You're talking about Andrea Levy thinking that she was white, because in your novel, there's this really Baldwin-esque assessment of one's identity. Jesse kind of discovers that he's not white in a sense. Um, so I write here, I find your novel to be Baldwin-esque at times, with astute observations about the Black child discovering for the first time that they are in fact Black, rather than what is considered the default human being, white, which we learn because of years and years of the colonization of hearts, minds, and bodies. How much of this pathology do you believe is at the core of Jesse's self-identity? Jesse is our protagonist for people who have not yet read the book.
I think it's sort of, you know, 99% of him, 99% of the time. And I think that's completely understandable because, you know, he has a white adoptive father. His mother believes herself to be a white woman. She's dark, dark Black woman, but when she looks in the mirror, she sees a white woman called Susan or something.
God have
And
mercy.
so, but she doesn't see her son as white, she sees her son as Black. So she subjects him to internalized racism. And he, with all of these sort of white father figures and sort of, you know, patriarchs in his life, like all the 10 elders in his congregation, he's a Jehovah's Witness, all the 10 elders in his, all 10 of the elders are white. So for him, the bottom line is, if I'm going to be successful in this world, if I'm going to survive in any way, I have to be white, you know? When Stephen Lawrence was murdered by white supremacist thugs in 1993, I remember Black people in my life saying, well, he must have done something to upset those white boys in order for them to take out their retribution. And that's the kind of environment that I grew up in. That's what people believed, that we were the architects of our own downfall as Black people. And when everything that you see around you, when everything around you sort of cleaves to this idea of white supremacy, whether overtly or subtly, you're just in that. You know, you're not conscious of anything else because you're not thinking outside of it. But sometimes, thankfully, there are those flashes that sort of bring you back, and it's those that are the sparks to further knowledge. And that's what Jesse clings on to in his life.
Our protagonist, Jesse, is in a precarious situation as someone who is a member of the Kingdom Hall, Jehovah Witness. We in America know them as the pretend you're not home and they're knocking on your door people.
Same.
And they descend on my block in like a multitude. It's not just one or two. It's like 20.
Squatty.
So, and I have a couple of friends who are Jehovah Witness, and they told me about these things like pioneers, people who achieve certain levels. I'm like, okay, whatever. But you write in Rainbow Milk, the Bible was supposed to have an answer for everything, but did not have guidance for sons whose families had betrayed them and turned them out. What role do you believe religion plays in the complication and erasure of sexuality and sexual desire? How does it vex our relationship to objective reality?
Thank you for these questions. So as far as being a Jehovah's Witness is concerned, other Christian denominations, other religions seem to be doing a better job. I'm generalizing here massively, but seem to be doing a better job of moving with the times. The witnesses that, queerness is absolutely anathema to them. Feminism is absolutely anathema to them. Women do not have roles in the congregation. There's no such thing as a gay person. So it's kind of, it plays a huge role because it forces you, what I think, right? So I was disfellowshipped when I was 17 years old. I had a similar kind of situation to Jesse, but it was still quite different, and it happened when I was younger than Jesse was in the novel. And yeah, I mean, I sort of believed that my life was over. I also felt like if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't been disfellowshipped, because I was so devout, I was a pioneer, as you mentioned, I was sort of preaching 60 hours a month. Yeah, that was my future. That's kind of what I would have done. And I don't think I would have left unless I was disfellowshipped, unless I was kicked out. I don't think I would have left.
Wow.
So, knowing how gay I am, like I'm gay, I'm really, really, really gay, like massively gay. But if I'd stayed a Jehovah's Witness, I would have denied that. I would have, God knows the pressure that I would have put myself under in terms of keeping that under wraps and keeping that from sort of bursting out of myself.
Mm.
But I would have had to do that. Yeah, I would probably be married with children, and living a lie completely. You wouldn't have rainbow milk. You wouldn't have this conversation right now. So that's kind of the impact. It's completely life-changing. And I might have sort of even convinced myself that I was happy because of the brotherhood
Right.
that you're part of. But you know what? I'm really glad I'm not part of that anymore.
Amen. No pun intended. It is so interesting that you talk about that you would have likely been married and maybe even had children, because a lot of the national conversation in the United States about the so-called down low gay man who gets married and has children is that the blame is placed on to him. That, well, why would you do this? Why would you not just be yourself, when it is so obvious that there are pressures from every corner saying, do not be this thing. Marry a woman, have children, be the provider, be the father. All of these pressures, not just social pressures, familial pressures, physical, it's physical, like people will beat you up if you're not man enough, and all of these things. And then these people are surprised by the fact of these down low men. And that just makes me think, well, if you made this world more habitable for people of different sexualities other than heterosexual and cisgender, if you did not make cisgender and heterosexual compulsory, then there would be no such thing as the down low man. So the down low man is your own creation. You did that. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't want down low men, open your minds, open your hearts.
Absolutely. And, we're still having this conversation. friend of mine, you know, living in London, you know, one of my actual best friend was homophobically assaulted the other day by a Jamaican guy, you know, the whole boom bye bye thing. And, you know, we thought like, that's not happened to us for like 10 years. We're just like, really? Um, you know, you're right about these pressures that surround us as queer people. Um, you know, it's insidious and it will never go away for some reason. But, you know, um, again, you know, the more of us who are visible and who are living our best and most truthful lives for everyone to see, that it's nothing to be ashamed of, that shame doesn't come anywhere near the conversation. You know, it's not for us to help them to accept anything. That's not our responsibility. But, you know, one of the, I guess, benefits of us being out and proud is them seeing us being happy, and perhaps that will inspire them.
Indeed. Before I ask my next question, I would just like to remind our viewers that if you do have any questions for Paul, please put them in the Q&A box down at the bottom with the two dialogue boxes. And I will, in the last 15 minutes of our discussion, ask those questions of Paul on your behalf. Paul, you talked to us a little bit earlier, you touched on it, about Jesse's relationship to his mother. And I want to sort of delve into that because it seemed that from the very beginning, she doesn't like him. Maybe because of his father, his biological father, maybe because his skin isn't as appealing as his biracial sisters, maybe because she senses his budding queerness. But it seems that her depression at having lost a child is directed pointedly at Jesse. What do you think is the nature of her hostility toward him?
I think you've identified several reasons, and I think they're all part of a big reason. I think reading your novel as well today, is it the character Bionti who tries to poison her child? Is that correct?
Oh, you mean Maggie? Oh no,
Maggie.
no, no. Well, it depends. I don't want to
Sorry.
spoil.
Okay, sorry, no spoilers. As children, we're not really sort of privy to what our parents' lives are like. You know, our parents are adults, they're big adult people, sort of, you know, making their own decisions, sometimes making bad decisions. And sometimes as children, we're part of those bad decisions that our parents make. And sometimes they take it out on us. You know, sometimes you know, the bond that a mother is supposed to have for their child with their child doesn't quite happen. That's not the child's fault, but the child has to live with that. You know, the character of Val and you know, in terms of the relationship that she has with Jesse, there are echoes with my relationship with my mother. I have absolutely no idea why my mother hates me. You know, I came out when I was 21. She's hated me since I was about 4. So, you know, I just don't know. So, you know, in terms of Val and Jesse, I had to make something up to to sort of explore, you know, because for me, you know, part of the whole reason for Rainbow Milk is to explore what's happened to me, you know, my thought processes, events that are taking place in my life and why, like, you know, just trying to map everything out and explain things to myself. And, you know, the mother-son relationship in this instance is no different. But I literally had to make something up. I had to invent a gay father in order to sort of explore this, this kind of sense of denial and hatred. I think we touched on it, as you said a little bit earlier, in terms of Val's um, racial self-denial. And, you know, again, who knows what she went through as a child? You know, who knows what kind of bullying? You know, we have in the UK, we have the sort of Secretary of State for the Interior, if you like, the Home Secretary. She's an Indian woman or a woman of Indian heritage. And yet she is so right-wing, so sort of white supremacist, so kind of you know, she's basically worse than any other white supremacist in this country. She literally does the master's bidding for them in just the cruelest, most awful ways.
That's our
And she sort of,
that is our
sorry?
Clarence. That's our Clarence Thomas, who is on the U.S. Supreme Court. He's Black, African American, and he does the bidding worse than the worst white
Yeah,
supremacists.
yeah. And so the white supremacists can turn around and say, oh, well, we've got a diverse, you know, government. And, you know, we've got like Asian and Black people who are, you know, creating these like race reports. And they're saying that, you know, the whole problem with Black people is Black on Black violence. So if it comes from you, then it's
And it's your fault.
and it's just sickening. It's just absolutely sickening because they're taking just the worst people as representatives of us
Right.
to do their bidding. And it's, you know, it's absolutely horrible to witness and be part of. But she sort of justifies it by saying she made a speech in the House of Commons where she said, you know, I got called a Paki when I was a child, and so, you know, don't tell me that I don't know what racism is, da 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 da. And I'm like, well, that shouldn't necessarily make you, you know, throw down all integrity and join the white master and literally climb on his shoulders and do his bidding for him and take the whip from his hand and whip your people with it. You know, that's not where you should be going. But you know, that's the kind of that's the power of white supremacy for you. It can literally blind people and turn them into the worst people, the most kind of self-denying, self-flagellating people who hate people like themselves because they don't see themselves as like that. You know, they will literally look in the mirror and see a blonde white woman called Susan. They don't see the Black, they don't see the Asian. So that's, you know, that's at the root, I think, of Val's hatred of Jesse. It's self-hatred. She hates herself. And because Jesse looks like her, I mean, she's married a white man after Jesse's, you know, father left. She's gone and married a white man. She's got three beautiful light-skinned daughters. And she treats them as her children, and Jesse is something else. And she cannot wait until, I mean, she won't throw him out, but she will make it absolutely impossible for him to stay at home. So like I said, there's no real kind of reason above all others for Val's attitude and the reason for her behavior and treatment of Jesse. And sometimes in life there doesn't have to be reasons, there just is
Mm.
the event, and there is the relationship, and there is the lesson that we can learn from it. So I've just sort of put it out there and hope that, do you know what? I just hope that other mothers will read this, other parents will read this, and, you know, question themselves, you know, my child is different. You know, my child is intelligent, my child is bright. Do I have a problem with that? My child might be more intelligent than me. Do I have a problem with that?
Mm.
And let's just stop that at source. That
Woo.
animosity, let's stop it at source.
That is heavy. And I'm also very sorry that because you shared that your relationship with your own mother is somewhat fraught like that, and I'm sorry that that's the case. Um,
Thank you. I mean, you know, there's nothing anyone can do about it. Like, you know, I've tried. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a really nice person. You know, I'm really nice. I'm lovely. I'm friendly, I'm helpful, you know, I'm, you know, just gregarious and sweet and loving. But, you know, and it's really hard because there've been times in my life where, you know, things have got really, really hairy and really difficult. And, you know, who's the person who you want to call? And, you know, it's, I keep getting emails about things like Father's Day from like florists, etc., whom I've bought from in the past, saying, we understand that Father's Day can be triggering for some. So if you'd like to opt out of emails about Father's Day, let us know. And I'm like, what about Mother's Day? But it's
yeah,
just so unusual. It's a much more unusual kind of dynamic, isn't it?
That's patriarchy. Patriarchy tells us that mothers are nurturing and loving and only ever good and innocent and vulnerable, and that fathers are absent.
But perhaps, Graham, Jesse's stepfather stroke adoptive father, is in a way trying to fulfill, without realizing it, trying to fulfill that role.
I have a question
Okay.
about Graham.
Yeah.
So something seems untoward to me about Graham, and I could be completely reading into
something what, sorry?
It seems untoward.
Okay.
There's this scene in the book where Jesse's mom Val is out, and when she comes home, she's like, "Well, what?" It's just Jesse and Graham home, and she's like, "Well, what were you doing all day?" And Graham says, "We were just laying on the couch watching TV. Ain't that right, Jesse?" I got the sense that something happened, something like he touched Jesse or something sexual happened. And then I saw an echo of that later when Jesse is being kicked out of the home. And there was this moment between Graham and Jesse. And I said, see, I knew that was something. Oh, am I right, or am I reading too much into it?
I think every reader brings what they bring to the book. So I'm really happy with your interpretation of that. I did think I intended the former, but just to show, so what happened was, Val had a miscarriage, went into hospital, and for a while Jesse was sent. For a while, Graham picked Jesse up from school, took him home, fed him, and they sat and watched TV together at home. So Graham and Jesse go to the hospital the next day, and Val's like, "So what were you two up to?" And Graham, I mean, there. Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're back.
Right. Sorry, I sometimes get internet trouble here. It's normally absolutely perfect, and then it just goes. So in terms of Graham and Jesse's father-son relationship, Jesse is clearly not Graham's son.
Right.
And where there, it's a majority white working class area where, black and white people don't often mix. You've got this interracial couple, and the woman already has a child from a previous relationship with a black man.
That's another thing. When Graham takes Jesse to his work, the coworker makes this comment about Jesse that made me feel very uncomfortable, and I was like, see. So I'm looking for the evidence, the breadcrumbs for this theory.
It's, part of it also is fetishization of black people, of black men. For even boys, from a very young age, black boys being fetishized and sexualized. I experienced that when I was a boy, and yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put that, I want to sort of put across that, I believe that Graham is a really good person, but that he is powerless against this. I think he probably thinks that the relationship between Val and Jesse is deeper than anything that he can cope with or intervene with. He's married Val, she's his wife, he loves her, and he will back her up on anything that she does, and that includes against her own son. And that's, whether Graham likes Jesse or not. I mean, he keeps his distance generally from Jesse, and I think that's what a problem, that I think that's a problem for Jesse, or creates a problem for Jesse, because I think you're right when you sort of identify a sense of shame, that there's a shame between them, and
Yeah.
shame and desire are so closely linked.
Mm.
So, I mean, there's more to unpack with that. But I mean, it's an interesting line of thought. It's not something that anyone's asked me before.
I hope that in the academic, scholarly approaches to your book, that these sorts of discussions make it to the fore, because I'm really, really interested in these sort of deep dives. I have a ton more questions, but we have 15 minutes left. And so I want to go to a question that's in the Q&A from Sonia Dawson. Thank you for your question, Sonia. Paul, I love what you said about delving into your unknown past. There can be so much pain that lies in the past, and I find that I'm often afraid to dig. Did you experience fear? And if so, how did you manage it to do the research required for your book?
Hi, Sonia, and thank you for that very, very good question. Um, well, first of all, this is an extremely long process. You know, when it comes to um, the subject matter behind this book, I've been working on it for over 20 years. So in the first instance, experiencing a lot of the experiences that Jesse goes through, not all of them, but like a lot of the experiences that Jesse goes through in the book, which I've fictionalized. I've added so many layers of fiction that they're unrecognizable, but you know, core events I've been through myself, and I've written about them, and so the purpose of my writing since about 2002-3 has been to chart the trajectory I underwent from being a devout Jehovah's Witness who was baptized at the age of 16. So witnesses baptize adults, not infants, because you have to sort of know yourself and be conscious of your decision to dedicate yourself to Jehovah. So I was baptized at 16, then disfellowshipped at 17. And when you're disfellowshipped, you're cut off completely. You're treated as a cancer that needs to be removed. So no one's allowed to speak to you. You're not allowed to get in touch with anyone at all, through fear of poisoning them with your sinful nature.
Mm.
So 16 to 17. And then by the age of 22, I'd moved to London and I was a sex worker. So, you know, for me, that was like a really sort of deep dive, you know. And I went through a sexual assault and was in recovery and just kind of writing and kind of thinking to myself, what kind of spiral am I on? You know, I have no one to protect me. I have no, each day is just, you know, cantering along, and I'm not in control of my life. So it became about gaining some kind of foothold in my own mind. That's why I started writing. And so, you know, that round of catharsis, that was cathartic. That round of writing was cathartic. And over the years, I've kind of like revisited stories, and you know, in hindsight, you kind of get new insights into what you went through. So I've kind of always again been in control of also, you know, I suppose my own personal historiography, if you like. Um, and but then once I got to a point where, you know, I was talking to a publisher and she said, I want you to write a novel based on this because it was too raw. The things I was writing about were still sort of open wounds, basically. And also because I was writing about family, about you know, sexual assault, things like that. There are certain things that I wasn't saying in order to protect certain people, for example. So she said, look, write a novel. Um, and from then on, I just had to sort of, you know, I haven't done an MFA or anything or any kind of creative writing degree or anything. So I had to figure out what my process personally was going to be with, you know, considering my material, what is the process going to be like for me? Because, you know, this is intersectional material. It's not something that you can just pick up any book from the shelf in the library and be like, oh, you know, I can sort of follow this template. I just didn't realize that there were templates for my novel. And I have since identified some which it's kind of interesting that I wrote the book without them. But yeah, I really just needed to be truthful to my own experience. And yes, there were elements of fear at times. Sort of going where I went, like with the sex scenes and things like that. You know, fear of the fact that as far as I'm concerned, in the Black community, we don't really talk about interracial, intergenerational queer relationships enough. We're not visible enough. And so I'm sort of basing my whole entire book on that. And, there's a sense that because, certainly in Britain, I'm one of very few Black men writing fiction at the moment, that everything that you write has to be representative. And this is certainly not representative of the whole Black community. So, yeah, when you sort of, go out there as strongly as I've done with Rainbow Milk, you kind of do, of course, have fear. But because I was going so far out there, actually, it made me really bold. And I just, whilst sort of being aware of the boundaries, I suppose, I knew that nothing like this had been done before. So I just thought, you know what, I'll do whatever I want. And thankfully that's paid off. But thank you very much for your question. I hope I've answered it.
I'm gonna skip ahead in my questions and ask, since we have like 8 minutes left, I'm gonna start asking the juicy questions now. So let's talk about sex. Non-queer people often cringe at queer sex acts, the way we engage in it, where we engage in it, how we engage in it, how often we engage in it. It is, in their view, always only disgusting. If and when they engage in comparable behaviors, that is to say, when they allow sex to be pleasurable and not just perfunctory for the purposes of procreation or habit, they consider that sinful too. Think about, for example, a dominant woman who wants to penetrate a submissive man, or a man or woman who isn't interested in penetration but has other kinds of sexual desires. Yet, here you are showing queer sex in all of its transgressive glory. Shout out to Samuel Delaney, who was also doing that stuff way back when. Why have you chosen to do that? And what has the reaction to it been like for you?
Well, I mean, I've written about sex, the way queer people I've known my whole adult life talk about sex. I've just sort of gone with what I know and how I know, So my first sort of queer friends, when I first came out, were butch, white, gay men who cruised public toilets, went to dark rooms, like took me to sex clubs immediately. These were really sex positive people, who, they're better or worse, were my first queer role models. And the language of their desire was, my first words really as a gay man. So that sort of stuck with me. And it's interesting you mentioned Samuel R. Delaney, because I mean, I think I probably sort of lost some of that language. I've sort of been embourgeoised out of speaking on those terms. But I read The Madman, or at least I read as much of it as I could take while writing Rainbow Milk. As well as The Swimming Pool Library. I reread The Swimming Pool Library by Alan Hollinghurst. Both of which are written in a sort of completely sort of, Hollinghurst in particular, like in a really sex positive but unashamed kind of way, just like, this is what it is, this is a man's body, this is what it does, this is what it feels like, this is what it smells like. I've treated the sex like I have anything else, food, hearing someone from speaking English as a second language, for example, music, the way I describe sex is the way I describe everything else. Because I think that sex should be normalized, all kinds of sex, consensual sex should be normalized. It's not for anyone else to judge whether I've overdone it or not. You know, some Black queer men who you'll think had the same identity as me might absolutely hate the sex that I've written. And yet some elderly white woman might read the sex and be like, wow, that's amazing. That blew my socks off. You know, so, you know, you can't really cleave to what people's expectations are at all. You just have to do your own thing and, you know, be bold, like I said, and sort of make your own mark. But I was also, you know, I'm really influenced by rap. And I only kind of realized this yesterday, like the whole of my style of writing, like the sort of the palimpsest of my writing, is really inspired by Kanye West and like his early work, you know, all the samples, all the voices, all the ways of glorifying the Black voice. That's all part of my work, and I've, you know, I absolutely think that that my work just wouldn't be the same without him. But also the, you know, rap lyrics, and, you know, when we talk about sex, like and being really full frontal about sex, like women in rap in particular, like look at Megan, look at Cardi B, look at Lil Kim, just
Okay.
absolutely unashamed and forward and bold about the sex that they want, about the man that they want to give it to give them that sex. And yeah, why, you know, why not be inspired by that? It's kind of, it's amazing to hear. So I just thought that the way I've written about the sex in such sort of literal and sensory kind of ways was the best way to show that same sex desire is a real thing. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's normal. And also that intergenerational, interracial same-sex desire is real and not something to be hidden just because it's not heteronormative.
I'm so glad you brought up music, because music plays such an integral role in Rainbow Milk. And I'm not sure if you did this intentionally, but you make specific song choices. So when Jesse is first encountering someone he meets at a bar for the first time, and they go back to the guy's house, certain songs are playing, and it makes the reader move through time. So I was realizing, okay, this is the 21st century, but this could also be the 80s, because the music is moving me backward. And I thought that was just brilliant, the way you used music not just as a soundtrack, but as a time machine, so that time itself became malleable. Um, and you made some really, really good song choices too. Shout out to Janet Jackson.
When I think of you.
Yes, I'm a huge Janet Jackson fan, if you did.
I know.
So um, tell me more about, and we only have a minute left, I know. Tell me more about um, why music plays a role, and was that time shifting sort of intentional on your part?
Um, well, I not really. I wouldn't say it was sort of intentional, but I just think it comes part and parcel, really. Because certainly within the gay community, within a desegregated gay community, um, soul divas are absolutely supreme. Okay, so that's a shared experience for us all as gay men going out on the dance floor. And I kind of realized that the way for someone like Rufus and someone like Jesse to have a conversation, to even know each other exists, is through having a shared experience of music. Um, and the 80s, do you know what? Like, you know, that part of the book is set in 2002. And always in any era, there's always a nostalgia for what happened 20 years before.
Mm.
And that was a really amazing time for music. Jesse would have been very small, but his mum, like, and her sisters were like, you know, getting down to Ain't Nothing Going On But the Rent by Gwen Guthrie, you know? And that's No romance without fun.
Remember that song?
And I thought that that line was perfect because, you know, not only did Jesse sort of witness his mother as a younger woman being happy at that time when that song was out and, you know, dancing in the front room with her sisters. 20 years later, Jess is like a sex worker who's like no romance without finance. So, you know, it kind of shifts across eras, of course, but you know, and the 80s being such 80s music, 80s pop being so rich and amazing. I just had fun with it. I mean, with anything that I do, it's always a bit deliberate, but also a bit just about unashamed pleasure.
it,
And
it just
indulgence.
added such a great dimension to your work in terms of temporality. Um, it was just so many brilliant choices in this novel just from a craft standpoint. So I'm just astounded that this is your first novel. And we are out of time, sadly, because look,
No.
just so that y'all know, I have 3 pages of questions for Paul that I won't get to ask him now, but hopefully we will be able to talk again so that I can follow up with these other questions because some of them are really deep. But Paul, I just want to say to you, thank you for not listening to the naysayers, for sharing your testimony, for speaking in the tongue of the ancestors, for giving us rainbow milk. May we all drink this and be so much better than we are right now, because this is just a masterful work. Thank you.
Stop it right now, because
Thank you very much.
oh, stop. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul and Robert, for such a wonderful conversation. And thank you, everyone, for sharing the space for conversation and connection with us tonight. If you don't already have Rainbow Milk, a reminder that you can buy it through Greenlight Bookstore. If you're local to Brooklyn, we're open noon to 7 p.m. every day of the week. Or I am dropping the buy link in the chat one more time. You can also shop at greenlightbookstore.com for local in-store pickup or for shipping anywhere within the US. Thank you both so much again for a truly wonderful evening, and have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank
Paul,
you,
we must
Robert.
chat more.
Yes, defo. Call me.
I'll send you my number.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.